Hey, good afternoon, Riverland College. Jeff Johnson here, your teacher on a beautiful first day of autumn. Well, it certainly doesn't feel like autumn. We have unseasonably warm temperatures here in central Minnesota, and I'm sure that it's even warmer down there in Austin. Teaching through a little bit of sadness today. There's a sort of a debacle unfolding just a few miles to the east of me in my old life at St. John's and St. Ben's, and probably eventually my old high school. It's an outbreak of the virus, right? It's in a few dormitories. We got a St. Ben's athletic team under quarantine. All the kids who live in houses off campus are not allowed to come to campus for 2 weeks, and they're going to try to control it. And we haven't even, it's not even cold weather yet, and record cases are soaring in Minnesota. I'm among the area educators that tried to speak up and say, could you not enact this, please? There's alternatives. We can teach from home. Set fire to the endowment, but they got greedy, St. John's and St. Ben's, and they wanted that tuition money, and it's only going to go south from here. I follow this because I love the place, as long and as complicated as my relationship with it is. And my younger boy, Will, he's dating a girl there, a senior named Liz, and I think they're starting up a story. And she's from St. Louis. One more quick comment on this. I've been meaning to treat myself to a cup of gumbo in St. Joe, Minnesota. But I'm not going into stores. I'm getting everything delivered curbside. Again, reasonably healthy 60-year-old dude trying to stay alive in a pandemic. So everything I get everything brought to me. And I finally broke down and gave myself a little treat before I went up to close what I call my personal church that I open up and close for 2 days a week for prayer, Tuesdays and Saturdays. And I treated myself, okay? I just veered into St. Joe, called ahead of time, and spent $18 on a bowl of gumbo. That's pretty spendy, and it was pretty good. But in the getting of the gumbo and having it delivered to my big half-ton truck, at a glance, I could just look around town and see tons of Johnnies and Bennies, hundreds of them, just partying in bars, in yards, in houses, up on top of roofs of houses. I saw a bunch of dudes, no masks, right, up on the roof of a house we call the hockey house. Yeah, I had a beer there in 1980 sitting on that ceiling or that roof with Caesar Tablet, but that wasn't a pandemic, was it? So, this could have been easily stopped. One other quick comment too. The last video I made for you was a little bit longer at 40 minutes. I probably won't do what I did there again, where I cue something up long and we experience it together. There's only so much that you can simulate. And I wanted to simply say that my big boy Jeffy, who's trying to turn me into a videographer, he teaches me something different every day. He made me look at something that I did not want to look at, which is analytics in YouTube. You can drill down into the data and see, not by name, but you can kind of see an amazing amount. They've really improved it. So what I observed was that the average viewer duration for my videos runs somewhere between 6 to 8 minutes. And let me just give you a couple ways of thinking about that. I felt crestfallen. I was deflated by that. So, just a basic fact. When I was a young teacher, I often entered into the hallucination that I was standing in a room and that every student in the room was paying perfect attention to me. That's a hallucination because it ain't true. Every one of you has the magical ability to sit in a class, be looking at the teacher, smiling at the teacher. You're not even in the room half the time. You're gone. So, and it's just a fact, and it can be explained almost scientifically. Think of it this way. Almost no one thinks in this way. Right now, I've had some coffee, and I'm probably ticking along speech-wise, word-wise, per minute, somewhere between 180 and 200 words a minute. That's about as fast as I can probably get going. Meanwhile, you have the ability to take in language far more quickly than that. Compare it to your reading speed. Probably most of you can read 600, 700, 800 words a minute. Well, think about that. If you can read at 800 words a minute with your eyes, but with your ears, you only need to take it in at, 200 words a minute. You've got leisure time, man. You can listen to the teacher for a while, check out, come back in, dip in, leave, think about what you're going to do Friday night or where you want to get lunch, and then come back in. It's just how it works. And I think of Emily Gibbs and one of the plays we're going to read from the Lost Generation writers, Thornton Wilder's Our Town. There's a point where Emily looks at her mother and says, can we listen to one another? Can we really listen to one another? And it's hard. So here's the only stance I can take. I'm having fun, if you can't tell. I'm having fun doing this for you. And it's not work. It's simply not. It's just, teaching is just life to me, even this kind of teaching. So the idea of packing up the tripod, the big one, and coming out here and setting up all my gear and making sure I had everything, this is fun. And but it's also, it takes time. You got to make the video, you got to do the editing in Final Cut Pro, which I'm realizing is absolutely astonishing. And then I got to go over to St. Ben's and jack the Wi-Fi and post up and get the things to you. Here's what I've concluded. This is the only way I can go forward. I know that some of you are watching these videos in their entirety. There's a sweet student in this class who told me that she loves to exercise. This is a mother with 4 children. And she half an hour is perfect for her because that's exactly how long she wants to exercise. So just for her alone, and for common sense maybe, I'll try to keep these at about half an hour. And I'm looking at that clock up there ticking, going, I'm 6:15 in. I mean, it gives me less than 25 minutes. But what she does is she takes the laptop down to her basement, maybe I've already said this, and she puts it on her treadmill or whatever, and she watches class. Why wouldn't you? That'd be a great way to take in my humble lessons. And here's my stance. I'm decided that to keep my chin up, I'm not going to go to those analytic statistics anymore. Although they're interesting. It's interesting to know there's more women taking this course than men. Well, that's everywhere in higher ed. I'm going to think of it this way. There's 25 of you. When I look at a video and look at the average viewer duration, and it ticks in at 8 minutes and 50 seconds, for whatever, and I see that there's 150 views, I can only assume, I'm going to assume and hope and pray maybe and dream that most of you are watching the videos not just to follow, survive a quiz, but just to have integrity. And that the other 125 people are just dipping in, maybe from my channel, maybe God knows how they found it. And I'm just going to imagine that they're the folks who are just watching it for a minute and then thinking, I don't want this scene, I don't want to watch a middle-aged guy talk about literature and writing. So that's, let's just call that my tactic. Glad to see you. Okay, here's what I got for you. And one of the ways of keeping the vids brief is, hey, I'm going to go with short poems for you. Okay, that'll be a concession to the clock. So I want to read you a poem by Ilya Kaminsky, who is an absolute rising star in American literature, and I'd like to bring him someday. He's young, he's cool, and I want to tell you a couple things about him, and then we'll get on to the main thing I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about sentences. And that's it. One thing today, really, after the poem. Ilya Kaminsky, his book, Deaf Republic, is called that because Ilya's deaf. He was originally born in the Soviet Union. He's an American citizen now. And kind of what sadly happened to him was when he was a little boy, 6 or 7 years old, he got strep throat, and it was misdiagnosed, and it went into his ears. Strep can attack anything in the body, and he's mostly deaf as a result. So listening to him read poetry, when he speaks, you can tell he's deaf, but when he reads, it's wondrous strange. He just starts this lilting singing. It can be unsettling and magical at the same time. You could look him up. You could look any of these poets up on the internet, Ilya Kaminsky. Deaf Republic is about an imaginary town that's taken over by a totalitarian regime. And prior to the onset of the book, the premise of the book is that a soldier shoots a little boy who's deaf. And when he kills that little boy, the whole town goes deaf. And the basic narrative is that a puppeteer sets up this theater and lures the soldiers in one by one to the puppet shows. And the people, one by one, they start taking care of the soldiers. It's really an amazing thing. Ilya Kaminsky. We lived happily during the war. And when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous reign, in the house of money, in the street of money, in the city of money, in the country of money, our great country of money. We, forgive us, lived happily during the war. Only English majors probably read what are called blurbs. Blurbs are always on the back of a book, and that's some other poet talking about how wonderful this poet is. And it's so fun to look and see that 2 of the 3 blurbers on the back of this book are poets I've hosted. Tracy K. Smith, our former U.S. Poet Laureate, and Lee Young Lee. And the Iranian-American poet I hosted just not quite a year ago, Kaba Akbar. Those 2 guys are just best friends. Okay, what I have for you today is the closest I'm going to get to a grammar lesson for you. When I walk into a classroom at the beginning of the year, I can see that the students are intimidated because English majors are intimidating, powerful people. And one of the first things I have to do is let everybody in the room know, hey, you know what? I'm not a grammarian. I suck at it. And you know what? I'm not so good at spelling either. So let's just take the pressure off. And the room just relaxes. It's like, oh, thank God. Because who hasn't had such an English teacher? I can tell you too, I feel like I've said this to you before, from long experience, I can tell you when I introduce myself, maybe I said that yesterday already, it doesn't matter, I'll repeat it. When I tell someone I'm an English teacher, they say one of 2 things. Oh God, I hated English in high school. What a knife. I also will hear, oh my gosh, I better watch how I speak. I just saw it yesterday. A sergeant from the Army wrote me because I forgot to sign the letter that I wrote to get Tony Kim into the U.S. Army. He was my student a decade ago. And when I wrote him back and said, hey, do I need to sign this? Is it really important? He wrote back and said, oh my goodness, I'm a little nervous. I'm writing an English professor. I better watch my grammar. So I basically just know enough about it to be dangerous. And here's what I want to put before you. If you want to be a writer, you have to get interested in sentences. You have to get interested in reading sentences and studying them and enjoying them. And you also have to get used to practicing making sentences. Now, when I was a younger teacher, I thought everything was about words. I told myself, if I can just get them interested in words like I am, they're important. They're verbal signifiers. They sign and signify what we're trying to say. Well, I wasn't on a wrong road, but as the years have gone by, I realized words can point everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So yes, it takes interest in words, but it's so much more interesting and important to learn to really be interested in sentences. That's the deal. I always think about units of meaning, and this is an actual writing lesson today, finally. I think about units of meaning. Now, I won't take it down to like the morpheme, phoneme units that a linguist would, because I'm not really strong with linguistics, but let's just go basic, right? When we write, we fill syntactic slots. We fill semantic slots. Syntax means word order. Semantics means word meaning. So you're just filling a slot. When you say, I like you, you had to take a pronoun and fill that slot with it. And then you needed a verb, and then you need something to absorb that word like. It's dead simple. We start with words. When we pile enough of them together, we get a sentence. When we pile enough sentences together, we get a unit of meaning called the paragraph. Para once meant mark. Graph comes from the Greek graphos, mark in that which is written. And if you get enough paragraphs together, you could have anything. You could have a novel. You could have a short story. You could have a declaration of war, a love note. You could have anything. But the thing I want to try to communicate to you is this is a style lesson, but it's also a grammar lesson. And I can't simulate this online, so really all I can do is talk about it. This is the time of the year at Central Lakes College where we have, and that's tomorrow, we have something called Student Success Day. And for some reason, I always pick this as the week to send 5-6 students to the most dreamy, giant blackboard in the world in my classroom up north, 65 miles to the north. And here's what I do. I call them contestants, even though it's not a game show, and I give everybody a piece of chalk. And I send them to the board, and I say, okay, I want you to write a sentence right now. And I'm going to give you the subject of the sentence, and just write one sentence. That's all you got to do. And I've done this for years, actually many years, way longer than the amount of time that I've been at CLC. I then say, and they're nervous, right? Because they're up in front of the board, and who's not nervous about that? And other students are watching them. And I sometimes run game show music for the sentence, and I'll say, please write one sentence about Student Success Day. And I did this yesterday on Zoom, except of course I didn't have a blackboard. So on live Zoom, I told my 9 o'clock and my 10 o'clock Comp 1 classes, your brothers and sisters, your colleagues, I said, take up a 3x5 card, whatever you got, a notebook, and then write a sentence about Student Success Day. Same thing happened, and I'm not brilliant for predicting this. And then yesterday, just to be proximate, I picked the middle row of Zoom squares, all in their little Brady Bunch squares. And I said, okay, middle square, or the middle row, starting with Javier. I'd like to just hear your sentences. And they read them out loud in Zoom. They unmuted and read them. And I was amazed. But I'll stick with Javi as the example, because he did something I didn't quite predict. But let me just cut to it. The main idea. When you all were little, you were taught by your dad, and I'll bet you were cute. When you were in elementary school, you were taught how to write with nouns and verbs, right? Now I remember those days vividly. I went through at my elementary school with something I would give anything to get my hands on. It was called the Roberts English series. The whole school had it. And every year you went down the hallway, you got a different Roberts English series book. Every year a different color, and every year it got thicker. And it was like a mashup. It was like a grammar book, a rhetoric book, and there was literature there. There were stories there. And it's those books where I committed my first poems to memory, right? Robert Louis Stevenson's Blocks. What are you able to do with your blocks? Castles and tables and temples and docks. Rain may keep raining and others go roam, but I can be happy building at home. The sofa, the mountain, the carpet, the sea, I can be happy building with me. I love doing that. And I remember memorizing that. So in those days when I was a kid, I don't think you did the same thing. We were always diagramming sentences, man. And it was hard, and you'd have to pick out the noun phrase and the verb phrase, and you'd have to mark everything. And my little kid brain, like yours when you were little, was taking in language and starting to figure out how sentences work. But here's the thing. I gotta say one other thing. Again, I'm not a grammarian. I can't even remember anymore the difference between a clause and a phrase. I don't want to know. If a phrase came up to bite me on the leg, I'd go, what are you, for a clause or a phrase? I don't think like that anymore. But one of the ways of thinking about sentences is this way. When you were little, you were taught to write with nouns and verbs. I think in terms of clusters. A cluster to me is any flurry of words contained by punctuation. I think in terms of clusters, or to put it another way, I think in terms of clusters or levels of generality, right? So the phrase, the sentence, I like you, that's one level of generality. If I say, I like you, though you disappointed me by giving me Spumoni ice cream, comma, that's two phrases, right? Or two clusters. So what happened yesterday that I'd seen year after year after year, you could do this at Harvard, you could do this at Riverland, you could do this at any college in the country. Send a bunch of students to the board and say, write a sentence about Student Success Day. I can guarantee you they're going to load the noun cluster. They're going to start with a noun cluster, okay? And maybe I tricked them by giving them something that's so obviously in the consciousness of the college during Student Success Day. But I saw it yesterday, 9 out of 10 times. Student Success Day is this Wednesday. Student Success Day is this Wednesday, and I'm not going. I am going to Student Success Day. Those are noun clusters every time. Javier, a little bit of an older dude from slightly older student, maybe, I don't even know how old he is, late 20s maybe, who's from Mexico. He's working on becoming a U.S. citizen like Ilya Kaminsky. A lot of people. He started the sentence with a preposition. He said, on Wednesday, I plan to go to Student Success Day, comma, because one of my teachers is mandating it. I'm like, whoa, he started it up with a different part of speech. So you must be seeing what I'm trying to communicate to you. This is not something to fret about when you're writing, but when I point out to really bright students, sometimes heading to tier or tier 1, 2 schools, when I say, like I said to Michelle Wenner in 1990, who's now a doctor, I said, okay, you're going to Harvard next year, and you just gave me an essay that has like 10 consecutive sentences that begin with noun cluster. with a noun cluster. So the takeaway is this: any part of speech can get a sentence going. You can get a sentence going with a preposition, with an adverb that has an ly ending. I don't even remember anymore or care what the difference is between a participial and a gerund, but that's a word that has a verb that has ing, which includes or indicates ongoing action, right? Um, this is something maybe you should worry about in revision. And another confession: I don't teach a lot of revision. Don't tell the dean. I'd rather read a new essay than read a revised paper because of my fragile attention span. So I got all that out in 21 minutes. Feels like it gives me a little bit of time to tell you a story. Again, any part of speech can get a sentence going, and it's something to think about as you read your writing, and it's something that you're not really aware of. Because most of us, when we start writing something, we're just heading up an alley, man. We're just groping up a blind alley, just trying to make and generate meaning. I'll close with a little story that usually warms hearts. I think about the world as a teacher, but I have other hats, right? I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother of a couple of no good sisters, and I'm a father of two boys. I wish I had so many more children, but only two boys walked into the room. It's like, is this all we get? Well, yeah, I should be thankful for that. But I always think of this. When my big boy was a little baby, a little guy, there was a period of time we had a cabin south of here. I hopped over a farm to get on this 20 acres, beautiful lake shore. But when my boy was a baby, it seems like there was a period of time where every time I came home, it seemed like he was in his high chair eating in the kitchen. He was always eating, and he got super fat between chronic eating and the breast milk. He just was a blob. It was like picking up a bag of cement. That kid was dense. His brother was the same way. You throw out your back picking him up. I'd come home every day, and I'd say the same thing to him. I think it actually irritated him. I'd say, "Hey, what are you doing, little guy?" He'd say, "I'm eating. I'm eating." And inevitably he was. He'd have Cheerios, or he'd have some crap macaroni and cheese. I'd come in and he'd be eating noodles with pesto, and the pesto would be all over his little bowling ball head. And I'd say, "Hey, little dude, what are you up to?" "I'm eating." "Hey, little man of mine, what are you doing?" "I'm eating, I'm eating, I'm eating." Riverland, beloved Riverland students, one of the most magical days of my life was the day that I drove up to our old salt box cabin. It almost felt that day like there was a different kind of light on the house. And as I opened the door, I'm almost certain I heard a distant celestial Collegeville choir. That's the name of the township I live in, Collegeville. I heard music, and I was like, what is happening? And that was the day I said, "What are you doing, little dude?" And he had food in front of him, and he had a sippy cup. Remember those? But that day was different. He said, when I said, "What are you up to? What's going on here?" He said, "I'm eating and drinking juice." It was like, yes, are you kidding me? Did you just do it? I'm eating is one level of generality. I'm eating, with a comma, I'm eating and drinking juice. That's his first compound sentence, man. He did it. He just did it. And of course, later, 3 and 4 and 5 level sentences came along out of him. And I knew right then and there he was going to be a no good English teacher, just like me. And that's what he is. I gave him a destiny. We're not entirely done with this. This is the closest I'm going to get to a grammar lesson for sure. Might have a little on punctuation for you, or I might make you do that. Might make you teach each other. But it's important that I tell you right now that a long sentence is not the thing I'm going for, necessarily. I like all kinds of sentences. I like little ones. I like little medium ones, like the little bear. I like longer sentences. Well, what's going to happen with some of you, especially those of you that are about 17, 18 years old, we'll come along and deal with this when we get to William Faulkner and Ernest Hemingway's novels. The trick of good writing is to keep the cluster short and balanced. And your trouble is that you're piling meaning onto meaning because you're figuring out how to do it. And as Shakespeare would say, the endings do forget their beginnings. And when I see long clusters from a really bright student, I know that I've got a student number one who's done some reading, and I see a student reaching for longer, more complicated structures. That is why one of the most destructive things that English teachers write on papers, this should be illegal. We should not write, this is a run-on sentence. I might write something different. I don't even write on papers anymore, but when I did, instead of writing run-on sentence, this is a run-on, I'd say, you know what, this sentence kind of needs a whip and a chair. The reason why that should be illegal is that it's always a student reaching for a longer, more sophisticated structure. They're dreaming, they're trying to write, they're trying to move their elbows around. And if you label a kid with red ink, run-on, well, you know what you're going to get the next time? Less than well-informed English teacher, you're going to get a series of short, safe, periodic sentences because that teacher is going to try to, the student's going to be trying to avoid the verdict of the grade and that red ink, which always looks like blood. I'm not to the half-hour mark yet. I got 4 more minutes. Let's end with one more story. One more that proves I'm not a grammarian, even though I'm a literary snob. I bought this farm from a guy named Jim Lemke. I stole 20 acres here on this deep, clean, private lake, 70 feet deep, crystal clear, spring-fed, for $50,000. I stole it from him. And he's dead now. I found him between his barn and his house. Heart attack, cause of death, beer and hamburgers. But a couple years before I found Jim, that was a sad day. I got a new farmer now, Marvin Niehaus, plows my driveway for next to nothing. One day, Jim and I stopped our trucks, my last thing today. We were at the end of our long driveway, and I think I was getting my mail, and he stopped his truck, and I turned off mine, and we just stood there a little while. 2 guys underneath a big, blue, beautiful sky. We were both younger. He was alive, obviously. And we looked down. This is a Stearns County farmer, man. This is a dude with like an 8th or 9th grade education. There's a Stearns County accent here. I'm guessing there's a Mower County accent for the farmers. And I looked down the highway, and we could see that Dan Mead was power washing his deck. I said the obvious. Dan Mead is power washing his deck. And Jim looked down the road, and he said, yup, he must be going to paint it. He must be going to paint it. A grammar cop would have said, where did you learn how to speak like that? What tense is that, Jim? He must be going to paint it. That's not how I heard that. When I heard, he must be going to paint it, I almost asked him to repeat it. I wanted to say, could you say that again? Just so I can listen to the music of your language? And I didn't. I just agreed and said, yeah, he must be going to paint it, Jim. Stay safe and well, Riverland. I'll get this posted today, and it's kind of hard to see the record button when it's above you. 28 minutes, 2 minutes under. But hey, woman who's on the treadmill, go another 2 minutes. Hit the half-hour mark.